Good afternoon, everyone. I see there are a lot more students here than there were this morning, so consider much of what I say today directed at you. Although, for those of you who are here this morning, I'm sure you'll appreciate that the term geopolitical, which you may or may not know, has had a very bad reputation for most of the 20th century, has really been revived and legitimized by way of holding this summit here today. And I'm very honored and pleased that you've convened this and that you've invited me alongside the distinguished other speakers who have been here today. And I take some satisfaction in the fact that you've called this a geopolitical summit, despite what I mentioned about the term's reputation. And the reason is because it's not a subject that's taught very widely anymore. But when I did study it, I learned that geopolitics is more than just international relations with a heavy German accent. The professor who taught me geopolitics used to say that international relations is just meteorology. It's just turning on the news and seeing the weather, and it's different every day. But geopolitics is like climatology, something like a deep science of world order and understanding dynamics in the world and how it changes. And incidentally, I would add that fits in very nicely with some of the questions that came in this morning about climate change. When you study geopolitics, climate change isn't just an issue on the agenda where countries can decide whether or not they're going to deal with it and give it a priority or not priority. Climate change is integral to the study of geopolitics because it affects space, geography, conditions in which people live, their power base, their industrial possibilities, their agricultural productivity, all of these things, all of which are fundamental to understanding power, which is what geopolitics is all about. Now, there are concepts of geopolitics such as hegemonic stability theory, power transition theory, world system theory, also things that you don't traditionally study in international relations. You'll find them all in my book, buried in a footnote on page 380. The reason is because I did want to write a book about geopolitics, but I did not want to write it like most books about geopolitics. I wanted to bring it to life and have a very different methodology, which would not pass muster in any IR department or social science department here, and that was to travel. Normally, when you're asked to do methodology, it's one of the longest sections of your dissertation. For me, it was basically just getting 4 passports to accommodate all the stamps, and that was my methodology. But I was inspired by someone who has only the highest level of credibility amongst geopoliticians, historians, and political scientists, and that's the British historian Arnold Toynbee. He's a hero to all people who study geopolitics because he wrote the definitive works, and there were many volumes of them, on the rise and decline of the world's major empires. And he was a hero to me because when he retired from Britain's Royal Institute in the 50s, he and his wife got on a ship and sailed around the world for a year and a half, and he wrote a book, a very thin volume, called East to West, A Journey Around the World. And he took all of his knowledge about empires and he put it to the test in looking at what's happening in very obscure places. And many of the countries and places that I visited, I sort of was noting the things that he observed when he was there and tried to contextualize those places and his theories in today's world. But the thing about Toynbee that goes to this question of methodology is that he never used terms like geopolitics and globalization. He didn't believe that there was a distinction between geopolitics and geoeconomics, as we heard this morning. These are all part of the same thing. You don't get to divide anthropology from economics, from history, from other areas just because it's academically convenient. And it was very nice to hear about the program again that's being launched here and how interdisciplinary it is. Geopolitics takes everything into account, every last thing, but without having to use big terms. So for those young students here in the room, you need not be afraid that you have to be the master of every academic discipline in order to understand geopolitics and global trends. What you do have to do, though, is be willing to grasp the system as a whole, the world as an organism, and that is actually the very origin of geopolitics, is not leaving any one part of the world out, and I'll get to that actually in a minute, because it's fundamentally about the relationship between power and space, whether that's geographic space, financial space, even cyberspace. All of those are fair game in geopolitics. Now, Most fundamentally, of course, as the term implies, geography is an element. And of course, the very field is associated with the notion that geography is destiny. And for that reason, I'm not prone to world is flat kinds of arguments. We know that most trade in the world is within regions. We know that culture, which is localized and regionalized, shapes institutions. And we know that geography over long distances is very difficult to conquer or to sustain the conquest of. So there's a stickiness to geography, which is absolutely essential.